President Trump made news this afternoon on his way out to Air Force One. He was asked point blank what happened to Jamal Khashoggi.
Jamal Khashoggi is dead?
It certainly looks that way to me. It's very sad. It certainly looks that way.
Then another reporter asked what consequences Saudi Arabia should face if it's shown they were responsible.
Well, it'll have to be very severe. I mean, it's bad stuff. But we'll see what happens. Okay? Thank you.
Well, both statements go beyond what the president has been willing to say up to this point. Keeping him honest, though, it's really unclear right now how much credence to give these news statements, especially the part about severe consequences. And I say that because nearly everything else the president and his people have been saying lately suggests that actually getting tough with the kingdom is the last thing anyone really wants. Instead, after days of echoing denials from the Saudis, raising the possibility of rogue killers and stressing Saudi Arabia's importance to the United States and the fact that the Khashoggi wasn't an American citizen, the administration now says it wants to give the Saudis more time to investigate. So let me just repeat that. Time for the Saudis, meaning the Crown Prince, to investigate a murder and possible dismemberment that he himself, or at least people closely connected to him, may very well be involved with. Listen to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who's just back from meetings with the royals in Riyadh, what he said about that.
They made clear to me that they too understand the serious nature of the disappearance of Mr. Khashoggi. They also assured me that they will conduct a complete, thorough investigation of all of the facts surrounding Mr. Khashoggi, and that they will do so in a timely fashion. And that this report itself will be transparent for everyone to see, to ask questions about, and to inquire with respect to its thoroughness. And I told President Trump this morning that we ought to give them a few more days to complete that so that we too have a complete understanding of the facts surrounding that.
Well, keeping it honest, though, I mean, it doesn't take a cynic to wonder about the fairness, the thoroughness, and especially the transparency of a Saudi investigation when it's conducted by the prime suspect, a country that has also had a long history of human rights abuses, a country which publicly beheads people, performs amputations as punishment, and imprisons dissidents. So if it seems like what happened to Jamal Khashoggi actually happened to Jamal Khashoggi, it would be right in line with what we've seen from the kingdom in the past. It also doesn't take a cynic to wonder how tough Secretary Pompeo was in this cozy-looking meeting with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Last night, an official with knowledge of the meeting told us that outward appearances notwithstanding, Pompeo behind closed doors was stern and told the Saudis to own up to their responsibility. And shortly after that, the New York Times, citing a former official who was briefed on the meeting, reported that no dramatic threats or ultimatums were made during that private meeting. And remember, as all this was playing out, we'd already been treated to a variety of stories from the Saudis or attributed to them. First, that Khashoggi had left the consulate unharmed. That's what they were claiming for days. Then that rogue elements may have been involved, and that was repeated by the president. And now again, according to the New York Times, something new, that Saudi rulers are thinking about blaming a top intelligence official who's close to the Crown Prince as a way of deflecting blame from the Crown Prince himself. Their stories keep changing, but the storyline and the suspect remain the same. For more on all this now, we're joined by Robert Jordan, former ambassador to Saudi Arabia and author of Desert Diplomat: Inside Saudi Arabia Following 9/11. Ambassador, thank you so much for being with us. I just want to start with this breaking news tonight. It's hard to see that if, in fact, there is audio or even video of what happened here inside the consulate, how the Saudis are going to be able to somehow talk their way out of this.
I don't see how they can possibly talk their way out of the fact that a murder occurred and a horrific treatment of a decent human being has led to a terribly tragic event. The real question, I think, is going to be how high up the chain of command does this go? Does it reach Mohammed bin Salman or not? This is where the tape may well not be conclusive. And so we're going to have to find other relevant evidence. The circumstantial evidence, of course, is quite strong. The names that have been listed are close to Mohammed bin Salman. There are photographs. My guess is also that American intelligence can go back to some of their collection and piece together facial recognition, other means of identifying how close to Mohammed bin Salman these individuals were, but it appears thus far that they were quite close.
Yeah, I mean, the New York Times is also reporting tonight that the Saudis are considering blaming a top intelligence official who's close to the Crown Prince, but not the Crown Prince himself. I mean, just given your knowledge of how Saudi Arabia works, is it realistic to think that a top intelligence official who's close to the Crown Prince would plan something without the Crown Prince knowing and be able to freely enter the Saudi consulate, commit a murder and a dismemberment, and not have anybody in the Saudi consulate apparently raise any questions about it or concerns about it to the Crown Prince himself?
Absolutely not. I think this is, I think every analyst who has ever looked at this will tell you the same thing, that it's inconceivable that the Crown Prince would not have known of this kind of a plot.
How important, I guess the next question then, in terms of Saudi relations, is how important is the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, who's, you know, relatively new to power there, how important is he in the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia? Are there other options of people who could replace him?
Well, there are other options of those who could replace him. Many of those, though, have been cast aside in the palace coup that the Crown Prince engineered a year or so ago with the spectacle at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Riyadh, the elbowing aside of Mohammed bin Nayef, who was the Crown Prince, and others before him. Mohammed bin Salman has become quite important to this administration. The relationship with Jared Kushner is a personal one now. I think this administration has a lot invested in this particular Crown Prince, which makes it all the harder to suggest that he should not succeed his father. But if you look at the track record of the Crown Prince, he's presided over one failure after another over the last 2 years. The war in Yemen, the detention of the Lebanese prime minister, the blockade of Qatar. You can go down the line, and one would ask if this fellow were applying for a job, what administration would hire him or give him a promotion? So I think we've got serious reservations about his suitability for the job. And long term, I think we need to have some very frank conversations with the Saudis about how this is going to be handled going forward.
Who would those conversations take place with? I mean, if clearly Mohammed bin Salman would be normally the person one would have real conversations with, not the king. From many reports, you know, the king is not in a state to have those conversations. But if you're need to have conversations about no longer having Mohammed bin Salman be the power behind the throne, I'm not sure having those conversations with Mohammed bin Salman is necessarily the go-to person.
Well, I'm not sure you can have that kind of a conversation, but the conversation I would envision would be, what are your plans for the future? You have to understand that you have placed the United States in a terrible position in this investigation and this affair that has occurred. What is your plan for Yemen? What is your plan for Qatar? How much do you want to deal with the United States? Here's what we have to offer, but we're not going to give you a blank check. These are the kinds of things that I think require what I would call a planning conference. We used to have planning conferences with the Saudis in Riyadh, and I think this is one that is called for. I think it's also imperative that we have an ambassador in Riyadh, which we haven't had now during this administration, nor do we have one in Turkey. So we've got to have leadership on the ground. We have to have relationships with these cabinet members, the other senior leadership of Saudi Arabia. Our intelligence people have to become involved. No, I don't think we can simply demand that the Crown Prince be cast aside, but I think he is demonstrating right now that he needs a lot of guidance along the way.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, the point you just made is a really important one that I don't think a lot of people is focused on. We have no ambassador in Saudi Arabia or in Turkey. It's certainly, you know, 2 years into this administration, that's a pretty stunning thing, and obviously would be critical in continued relationships. Ambassador Jordan, I really appreciate your expertise. Thank you.
Thank you, Anderson.